Hey church, and welcome to this week's small group. Now this last Sunday we asked the question, what does the Holy Spirit do in the life of an ordinary Christian? And the answer is simply that the Spirit gives us the boldness to do the unbelievable. Now on Sunday we were talking about the unbelievable thing of sharing our faith, but today I want to talk about unbelievable generosity. I'd like to start out our time together by talking about two different business leaders. In early 2016, Hamdi Ulukaya, founder of Chobani Yogurt, made the front news with a business decision. He had gathered all of his employees together and he had taken 10% of his company's stock and he gave it to his employees. Now what that basically means is that if he ever takes the company public, they will make a lot of money on their stock, or once they retire, if they want to sell that stock back to the company, they could be millionaires, even though they're only blue-collar workers. The second businessman that I want to talk to you about is Martin Shkreli, the CEO of the pharmaceutical company that raised the price of a life-saving pill from $13.50 to $750 a pill. You know, when you read those two stories, you get a sense that those two men had a very different interpretation of right and wrong. Neither one of them did anything illegal, but yet you could see how they both viewed the world in a very different way. So the first question is, how might you expect these two business leaders to view the world differently and to live differently from each other? The generosity of the gospel is supposed to change us. God the Father allowed His precious Son to die for us. That was His generosity. Jesus was so generous that He gave up His own life for you and for me. The Holy Spirit is generous in how He gives us spiritual gifts and comforts us when we need Him. And at the end of the day, those things are supposed to change us. We should become more generous ourselves. You know, I was so proud of our church family a couple weeks ago when Hubert and Tidy, we provided all kinds of things for their house as they're just trying to get a new start. Today we're going to go through a second story. It's different from the story we went through last week. But I want us to start out our time together by reading the words of Jesus. Mark chapter 3, verses 31 through 35. Was Jesus disrespecting His family? Or was He elevating His disciples? And how have you experienced the blessing of having a family of God? Now some people would say that Jesus was disrespecting His family. Perhaps His family felt that way. But I believe that He was not only elevating His own disciples to being part of His family, but I believe that Jesus was inviting His mother and brothers to something much deeper than just blood relatives. By the way, eventually Jesus' family accepted that invitation and became a huge part of the church. If you don't believe me, look into his half-brother James, who became, I would suppose, the biggest church leader during that first century church. But let's see how this new concept called the church puts Jesus' words into action. Read Acts chapter 4, verses 32 through 35. Why might biblical stories and examples of radical generosity make us nervous? And what would a life of radical generosity in the church look like today? I don't know if anybody in your small group was bold enough to say it, but I'm going to just tell you, I personally get nervous at radical generosity because, quite frankly, I wonder what God is going to want me to do and how much is it going to cost. But we're going to get now to the point of the story that always bothered me, the part about Ananias and Sapphira. Read chapter 4, verses 36 through the end of the chapter, and then into chapter 5, verse 4. What was the difference between the gift that Barnabas gave and the gift that Ananias and Sapphira gave? What do you think motivated Ananias and Sapphira to make a donation in the first place? And was it a sin that Ananias kept some of the money from the sale of his own property for himself? Why or why not? So I believe that Ananias and Sapphira were there when Barnabas gave his generous gift. He was radically generous, and the people probably clapped and got all excited about Barnabas. And so instead of being motivated by generosity, I believe that Ananias and Sapphira were motivated by selfish ambition. They wanted the notoriety of everybody thinking that they had sacrificed. See, I personally believe it wasn't a sin to keep some of the money. If they would have come in and said, hey, we sold our property and we're giving a portion of the sale to help our church family, it would have been fine. But their selfish motivation wouldn't let them. They lied to their church family, and they tried to lie to the Holy Spirit. What are some ways dishonesty might creep into our giving? And how can we guard ourselves against dishonesty in giving? And how can reflecting on the gospel of Jesus lead us to joy and generous giving for the benefit of others in need? Next, I want you to read Acts chapter 5, verses 5 through 11. How might this biblical narrative feed into some misconceptions people have about the God of the Bible? And what truths of the Bible would help us respond to those misconceptions? You know, people might read this story and think that God is cruel, or that the church is greedy and that they created this story to try to extort money from people. If you don't give your money to God, then you're going to die. You know, I believe that God just wanted the church to be holy. The Bible is always concerned about our hearts. Even when it talks about money, it's not talking about an amount, it's talking about our hearts. Because I believe that God knows the hold that money can have on our hearts. Close with this last question. How is God working on your heart to be radically generous? Close in prayer. Ask the Holy Spirit to align our hearts with His, and that the things that are important to the Spirit would be important to us. And remember, the Spirit gives us boldness to do the unbelievable. Have a great rest of your small group. Don't forget to invite somebody to small group from church this next Sunday, and we'll see you there on Sunday.